right, good. Joyce Taylor, who is one of my favorite transportation people in the world. Joyce is the Deputy Commissioner of Maine DOT. And Joyce has one of these abilities to see the really big picture. And she's also an engineer, so she sees the details too, which is rare in a person. And also Joyce listens really well and has been able to work with GPCOG on a whole variety of projects and our municipalities to build a lot of transportation infrastructure. Joyce is going to talk to us about how the state, and in particular DOT, is thinking about how they can support municipalities as you develop housing, particularly with infrastructure. So we're gonna dig into that a little bit. Joyce was supposed to be joined by Samantha Horn, who is the director of the Maine Office of Community Affairs. And Samantha, unfortunately, is under the weather today. We're wishing her a speedy recovery. It's been a tough week for a lot of people who've been sick. I know many of you I talked to coming in, you're all fighting coughs, and we're here just trying to struggle through that. And so Joyce is gamely agreed. Cough, cough. Yes.
With her inhaler right here. So.
Yeah. So we're glad to have you, Joyce, to join us, even though, you know, you were supposed to be balanced out by thinking about other infrastructure. So we're going to dive into transportation with Joyce a little bit more deeply than we'd originally thought. But I did want to just give a little plug for the Maine Office of Community Affairs, MOCA, for you to engage if you are municipalities with MOCA. MOCA is a new office. It kind of came out of GOPIF, I guess, sort of, kind of, and the Governor's Office for Policy Innovation in the Future. And Samantha is leading the development of a one-stop shop that's supposed to be a resource for municipalities. The overall approach is to look at planning and resilience, so climate resilience, housing and development all together, and in the view of trying to create a more resilient future and help our municipalities get to that vision as well. And so we've already found at GPCOG it's a really great resource. And I know Joyce works closely with Samantha as well as GOPIF and some of the other agencies. So we're going to talk a little bit too about how that coordination works on the, in real life, and how municipalities can better access state decision makers. Sound like a good plan?
Sure. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
We're so glad to have you. And particularly because I know you're still fighting a cold. I would have been sitting here by myself without Samantha or Joyce, so I'm really glad Joyce came.
I'm glad to get out of the house right now, but I did test negative for the flu, just in case anyone is wondering.
So we're good with that. All right, so we're going to talk about how you and the broader administration are approaching transportation infrastructure to support housing, in particular because the state has created this large goal, 84,000 units, and then all the agencies need to try to figure out how to make that happen, not just DECD. So I'm going to start with actually, just describe your role at DOT, because it has evolved from chief engineer to deputy commissioner.
Yeah, so as deputy, I'm doing much more policy-related things and really trying to be an external person for the department to be able to have these kinds of bigger picture conversations. Oops, okay, now I'm on. So I've been working on a couple big projects, for example, one on mobility management with other state agencies and advocates about transportation for people with Medicaid, Medicare, different populations that need a ride, and how are we going to get people those rides? How are we going to make life easier for them? I have to tell you that it feels a little bit like solving world peace to me. This conversation is really hard. And I've dived into the DHHS world and I'm a little scared. So that's what I know so far. I'm educating myself. And I'm also, you may have heard of the Portland West work. That is the Gorham Connector, dead. And we've been asked to pick something up and to go and talk to communities and have a very transparent, may I emphasize transparent, process to talk about the Portland West corridor. So trying to lead more public, I think, conversations on behalf of the department on some difficult topics.
And you also have been really part of Maine Won't Wait.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the climate plan. I've led the transportation working group under the Climate Council. That's been a very interesting experience for me. Personally, I've really enjoyed it, learning. I've learned a lot of things that I haven't been exposed to before. met a lot of really interesting people. I see some friends in the room here. And I think, really trying to help lead, that is definitely a multi-state agency, all kinds of advocates and different interest groups that don't agree, frankly, flat out don't agree on some things, and trying to find where we can at least shake hands and move something forward. And, maybe there's not consensus, but there's an agreement to not fight. And sometimes that's as good as it gets, and you go with that. So, but yeah, I've been working on that as well.
And one of the things that you were working on you did electrification and clean fuels for cars, but you were also looking at how to reduce the amount of vehicle miles traveled,
right,
which kind of spawned a working group that was working on smart land use policies, right? To kind of put the whole package together of how you reduce greenhouse gases from transportation.
Yeah, actually, as part of the last climate plan update, we, led by GoPIF and Sarah Curran, who runs that right now, really delved into housing and how do we help get dense housing? How do we get housing where people can walk and bike and not be car reliant? And what do we as a state have to do? So I think that was the start of some of the conversation that really helped spur some of the things that you all have been talking about today at a statewide level.
And then one other thing that relates to housing is Joyce has also been working on some Safe Streets for All work. We're trying to look at how to protect people who are more vulnerable on the roads.
Right. I think some of the work that we've been doing at DOT is we've just redone our complete streets policy. We also spent a couple years of, which I led, about thinking about how we set speed limits and really, frankly, throwing the 85th percentile out the window.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So, most people, 85th percentile is like, a dirty term for most people who know what it is. And you set the speed limits based on a certain percentage of how fast cars are going and set it at the 85th percent of, the higher speeds. And if you do that, a lot of times you're out doing these speed studies. I could be out on Route 9 on the airline and I'd be setting speeds at like 70 miles an hour. So that's not what you want to do. So one of the things that we've done is adopt a new study by the Transportation Research Board that talks about context and deciding what context you're going to have and what maximum speed limits you're going to allow in those context areas. And spending a lot of time talking about villages, and we don't really necessarily have the deep urban, right? But we have suburban, we have rural village, we have different categories, and saying we are, as a department, we're willing to work with a community if they say all these people really don't feel safe walking. So DOT, your traffic engineer says, well, nobody's walking there. Well, guess what? They don't feel safe walking. That's why they're not walking. But if we allow some context, speed tables, which we've typically not allowed in certain areas on arterials, we would now allow, if the community wants to work with us, and the community is dedicated to taking care of the context items. And, you need vertical typically to get people to feel, narrowed up and to slow down. And our concept is you really have to rely on voluntary speed compliance. Police departments are tapped out doing all kinds of other things right now. They just don't, in my opinion, have the time to do the speed enforcement they used to do when I was a child. And we have to get people to want to voluntarily comply. And if that one person does, the 10 cars behind them pretty much have to. And so we're really refocused on, we know, and we've measured it, and it's nationally we know. If you ask us to put the speed at 25 and it's 35 now, and you've done nothing to change the context, nobody's going to drive at 25, maybe one or two people, but the context is important. So we're really trying to roll out that, we want to help you get places where you want to walk, and especially when you start talking about bringing housing into it. I live in a town that decided to rehab their local school and keep it downtown. We did some changes about 2 years ago with a couple intersections that are pretty busy, car-centric, and really protected the pedestrians. I can't tell you, I mean, it's really interesting to me. There's like 10 times as many kids that are walking now by themselves without an adult because it just feels safer and they're seen. So I think, one of our approaches is we don't necessarily need $10 million projects everywhere on every village, but sometimes these $100,000 projects where you fix a little bit of an intersection can make something more walkable.
That's great. Yeah. So I wanted to have Joyce start drawing that line between safety, speed, and supporting housing. Because you could put a highway next to a high rise and you're just making sure that everybody has to drive because they don't feel comfortable getting out on the road. So the transportation infrastructure really matters for new housing. So I'd like to ask you, the previous panel was talking about how municipalities were experiencing infrastructure barriers when they're trying to build particularly high density housing. From Maine DOT's perspective, what do you think are some of the primary transportation related barriers to housing development?
I think that location right from the beginning can sometimes create some of the barrier.
The location of the new housing development?
Yeah, because if it's teetering on the edge of a village and there's nothing there now for a connection, right? There's definitely not a transit connection. There's probably not a sidewalk that goes out there. Part of the process that's happening right now is if there are enough trips and you're going to generate a traffic permit, then we're going to say, okay, developer, you need to pay for this infrastructure. Typically, they will pay for maybe a left-hand turn. This has always been a very car-centric approach.
The traffic management
The
permit.
traffic management. The traffic rules now allow us to require things like sidewalks. When we've tried to do that, we are getting major pushback.
Because people don't believe that people aren't going to use their cars.
We get told no one's going to walk. And I'm like, really? They can see the grocery store right over there. Of course they're going to walk. They don't have a choice. And I think, our concern, and we've been talking about how do we help do this? Because it's clearly the state of Maine wants more housing. But if you're going to put a low-income housing next to an arterial and all the services are over here, that arterial is not safe to cross without major changes. And so, and we see it all the time. It's not just a one-off. I mean, it's where schools get built too, right? I mean, that's what happens. The land is cheap. So trying to, I think, find a more collaborative way to work with towns from day one, because the goal is good. And I think trying to be solution oriented. And if we could at least acknowledge people are going to walk. It's really hard to have a discussion when from day one you're told by a developer, and we get told by this with schools. My favorite thing is schools, 100% bust. I'm sorry, really? I mean, it's just not believable. So, and it shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't be. You should want people to be able to walk. So I think, if we could have that collaborative conversation from day one, we understand that people have to pick cheap land. That's
especially for affordable housing, because the land cost really figures in.
But I do think the Department of Transportation, Acting Commissioner Dowdy and I were having this talk a couple of weeks ago about should we look at our approach to some of these housing developments? What could we do differently? So I think we need to look internally a little bit, and how do we get to a yes? How can we get to a yes should be what we're thinking.
Has the passage of LD 2003 and LD 1829, has that changed how DOT is thinking about where it invests or how it invests?
Not really. I think we were already sort of there in terms of trying to support some of those goals. So I think we're already aligned with some of what people want to do. I would say that in a lot of ways, I think the discussion that's happening today very much aligns with the department's goals. We want denser housing. We would prefer that. It's less infrastructure, frankly, for us to have to deal with when it's dense and it's in the right place. And we can better support the idea of transit and active transportation where everybody can use it. And so I think there's a lot of like goals. It's just still early in the conversation.
So one of the panelists, Tom Hall, in the last panel was talking about how congestion and traffic concerns from neighbors tend to be one of the biggest barriers for locating new development, even, high density development in growth locations. So how does the department try to mitigate for that, or do you?
It's always a very site-specific situation at this point, and it does get difficult. We all know the NIMBYism thing is strong, and they try to use, really DEP and ourselves, anyone who's giving a permit, as an avenue to fight something. And so I think what we can do is keep looking at our rules and what we permit and try to adjust them to make sure that we can be flexible to see that, we can get to that yes. But it is difficult. People, I heard Tom say it, don't like change. They don't like anything new. It's scary, and people want things to stay the way they are. And so it's always kind of a struggle. We find ourselves often in the middle of a neighborhood struggle thing going on with the permits.
Yeah, and I mean, traditionally, you were alluding to this, the traffic management permits for developments, they tend to require more asphalt,
Yes,
right, for turning
right.
lanes and infrastructure upgrades and things like that. So, we'll hear, well, this development is going to cost a lot because DOT is requiring us to do all of this additional work.
Yeah.
But it sounds like that's starting to change.
I think that the last update of the traffic rules allowed us to step away from that a little bit. It allowed us to say, hey, if you want to invest in transit or you want to invest in a sidewalk or active transportation, we may not do more asphalt. In fact, if you're doing less parking at your facility, and that may help, that may actually be mitigation. So trying to have those more open conversations than just the typical, why don't you add a turning lane, which is always what ends up happening. So
yeah. So, one of the other constraints, and we have, I think, Greater Portland Metro in the room, we've got Mike here with us today, is inadequate public transportation. Ed Susseldick, president of Metro. Oh, another Metro board member here from Gorham. We're literally waving the flag. Thank you, Lou. And so one of the things, and hopefully, Mike, you won't take offense to this, but we don't have a transit-rich region yet compared to other places. And so it isn't frequent enough, reliable enough, and it isn't fast enough. And so I'm wondering how DOT is thinking about its investments and support for public transportation, because public transportation can catalyze a lot of higher density development that is more walkable.
Right, definitely. I mean, we're having conversations with Metro right now about a new bus facility or, upgrades, but what can we do to work with them to make that a positive thing? There's lots of conversations going on right now about, in the climate world, as well as, what is the direction we go in. There's huge amounts of interest in rural transit, which I don't think any state in the country has nailed at this point. Do you know of one? I don't know of one. I've been looking.
It is such a conundrum.
I mean, there just isn't enough money to stand up every wish and desire people have. So I think, we all have to think about how we do it more efficiently, differently together. But I personally think, and this is Joyce's personal opinion, we need a huge do-over in terms of education campaign and having people understand it's a good thing to ride transit. I grew up in Burlington, Vermont. My parents were really strict. I didn't get that car hardly ever. I rode transit. That's how I got around. So I kind of grew up doing it back when it wasn't such a thing. And, so it's more natural to me because my parents were like, you want to go somewhere, get on the bus. And we didn't drive everybody around back then, our kids around. You took the school bus, took transit if it was there. But I think we need an education campaign. We need to help mind shift. It's not just mode shift. You got to switch that mind, right? Where people are willing to do it. But it has to be something that's reliable. What other trips do we add? So I think there's a lot of conversations going on with a lot of groups around transit right now. Mike knows more than anyone probably in the room. I think the microtransit going to Scarborough is a huge, good step that the Turnpike and Maine DOT are helping with Metro to stand up. I think where are those pilot opportunities? We're looking for those kinds of opportunities. We had a grant under the MJRP funds with rural workforce. And that was can we set up these micro transit opportunities to get people to work? And I think one of the things we need to do more of is do pilots. And I think that we've been willing at the department to fund some pilots and to see what works. Instead of just everyone, the LAP right now, right, Lewiston to Portland, is a pilot. We're trying to stand that up, get it stood up. Can it survive? Can it continue? Like, instead of just saying no, and fighting over some things, if we can afford to pilot something, let's try some things.
So I'm going to ask you what I think is the big elephant in the room, which is that we have so much transportation infrastructure in this state for so few people. It costs so much to maintain. It was built in the 50s and 60s. We have all these 295 bridges that need to be replaced. And how is the department going to start pivoting, particularly for our region where we have the potential to be transit rich, we have the potential to have more walkable places? How are you going to start pivoting on your investment portfolio to make sure that we can make that shift to allow more people to get around more easily?
It's difficult. We are going to look at a 3-year work plan that has less money than we've had before. We lived and died on grants. They're not necessarily coming through right now. Administrations have different priorities. If I was in Mars Hill right now, we were having this conversation, they'd be going, could you just go fix that culvert because it's going to blow out and it's going to be a 30-mile detour. Different regions of the state have different concerns. I've told you this before. We've tried to remove some bridges just to get them out of our inventory. I literally could stand from here to the garage and see that second bridge, and the town manager's arguing with me about why the town needed that bridge, and I'm standing on this one over here. It's $1 million. I mean, it's a token, right, in our budget, but it's still like $1 million to go fix something that I can see. Nobody likes anything to be taken out. It's a fight.
And your former commissioner, Bruce Van Note, used to say, we're managing a transportation system in decline. Yeah. We're going to have to let go of some infrastructure, which is really difficult to do.
We're trying. I think, I can tell you're going to probably be more aggressive about taking out some lower traffic, expensive bridges, but it becomes a rural Maine versus urban Maine conversation that you don't necessarily want us having, right, at the legislature. So it's trying to be thoughtful. But at the same point, we know that, getting people to take transit, that is important. And I think we know that standing that system up with more stops, more frequency, that will encourage people to take it. So it's not that that's like a last priority, but it's trying to find that balance within everything. But it's difficult. I'm not going to lie. It's an everyday discussion, difficult. But at the same point, we had one of the worst years we have ever had in this state for fatalities of pedestrians, bicyclists. We have to keep people safe. And I think there are things we can do. We've talked about when we come through on a paving job, and it's a heavier pavement job, we've committed to PACs that when we come through in this region, we're going to do some upgrades for pedestrians. We will do some things apart from paving on those projects to make it better. Is it transformational? Probably not. It won't be. But can we make it better? And I think that we have to be, really thoughtful about that. I tell our folks all the time, the paving folks, do we know where people want to cross the road? Could we at least put the crosswalk where they want to walk? Yes, I get that that's where you want it, but you just worked a late shift, you're tired, you have to walk, it's like cold out, you're going to cross the street right there. That's the way it is. And, just trying to see if we can work better with communities to identify things like that.
So shifting gears a little bit, there's no one agency at the state level that's responsible for housing, right? We've got multiple agencies. You've got DEP that does the permitting, you who figures out the transportation infrastructure to serve it. You've got the Department of Economic Development. You've got now the Maine Office of Community Affairs, Maine Housing, of course. So there are lots of different agencies that have pieces of the responsibility of housing. how are you all coordinating together? So say Westbrook comes and says, we're going to put or Wyndham, here's a good example, Wyndham, we're going to have 400 units that are now going to go on 302. How does the state as an entity deal with that? Practically, do you all have like a council you get together and say, hey, this Westbrook development's coming along, or is there ongoing conversations between the agencies? How does that work?
So it's a little bit more organized than it has been. I think because of the LDs, GoPIF established a monthly meeting of all of those agencies where everybody kind of reports out on what they're doing, so everybody knows. I will give kudos to the governor, and this cabinet works together better than any cabinet I've ever worked with, and they're really good people. So just by nature, if there's any kind of conflict, it immediately where people are told to work together. So that's really good. But typically, if it's a big project like that, depending on where it is in the stage, one of the state agencies is going to be on point, and then the others will be invited in. And if there's going to be some, a no coming, state agencies most likely, it doesn't always happen, should be talking before that no is delivered externally to see if it really does have to be a no. And so there is some attempt to sort of coordinate with each other. I think that's getting better than it was. We can do better at it, I'll tell you that. We sometimes are slippery and get away from the others, but we can be better. But it also, let's be honest, developers, no offense, but they're kind of like my kids. They can go answer shopping. And so then things get away from us when that happens. And so, but I think trying to put one agency on point has, especially for the more high profile or bigger projects, or the ones that may have perceived issues, trying to make sure there's someone on point and everybody understands that.
Great. All right, Becca and Lucy, I think we're ready for audience questions. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask Joyce? Ed Susslebeck. You can wait for the microphone if you would, Ed.
A recovering politician, Joyce, Ed Susslebeck, board president here at Metro. First of all, thank you to you and your team for your support of transit. It's been great working with you.
Good.
We're getting some, innovative programming going. So thank you for that. It's hard though, and I guess I'm going to push a little bit back on what Kristina said. I think we actually have pretty good transit service, not evenly distributed throughout the region, but in places in the region.
Yeah.
And where we've been able to use ARPA money, for example, to improve frequency, extend the length of service, we've seen dramatic ridership increases, so we know it works. Any thoughts on how we can work together? Because I feel, as a former city councilor, I feel for the municipalities when Metro comes in and says, we need a lot more money from you because they only have one place to go for it, the property tax.
Yeah.
Any way that we can work together to improve, either come up with new sources of funding for transit or improve the way the state allocates, it does. I love all modes, but the Downeaster gets a lot of money per passenger, and 4 out of the 5 busiest stations aren't even in the state of Maine. And that's all coming from the state of Maine. So are there ways that we can work together to improve that? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always open to working to improve things. The PTAC is back up and running, right?
Can you say that acronym?
Oh, I can't.
The Public Transportation Advisory Committee.
I get it confused. I'm sorry. Well, I have been sick, and I'm lucky. Like, I want to say hot, and I'll say cold. So if you catch me doing something like that, just tell me. So my brain is still addled here. I think we're going to have to get creative about all kinds of funding. There's not enough for anything, and that is the reality. And we could hide our head in the sand or just deal with it. And I think we're in the, we got to deal with it and figure it out. And, one of the things when there's not enough money, how can we allocate some things differently? I think Acting Commissioner Dowdy, is really trying to make a point that we do have to take care of what we have first, right? We won't be building a lot of new things at this point. I can tell you that. There's no money for that. But I think part of taking care of what we have is transit. And I think that we know people want transit, and people want rural transit, which is really tricky right now, right? Because I don't know how to stand that up And I don't really know that anybody knows that. I'm not joking about that. We are going to be hiring a consultant to go out and do best practices on rural transit and try, I think some states have been doing some different things with cost allocations and doing some things. I think that's part of the transit conversation, though, is some of the other monies that are out there that other agencies have, and how do we get some of those rides, right, paying for some of this stuff. So it's a really hard, I told you the mobility things like solving world peace. I'm kind of not joking. It is I've been involved in a lot of really complex projects. This is really a complex discussion around rides.
I have one here. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Anna Bullitt. I'm on the Portland City Council, so welcome to Portland today. And I'm on the Metro Board of Directors, and I'm on S&T, and I'm the chair of HHS and Public Safety for the City of Portland. Thanks for your service to the state of Maine, truly. Thank you. I really appreciate, so I have the mic, so I'm going to talk only about transit, not about housing. I really appreciate what you said about speed limits and the willingness to work with the municipalities on appropriate speeds. I haven't heard that from state staff before. That was really lovely to hear. And like based on local lived experience of the community members, that's great. I also appreciate your acknowledgement of the enforcement limitations. We feel that really, really hard here. So like you mentioned, given the high profile, really tragic, accidents resulting in pedestrian deaths across the state, often during daylight hours,
right?
Like right here in Portland, in some busy places. I have two questions. Number one, do you think the state would extend their collaboration on speed limits to their own limits on routes like 302, which is Forest Ave, to lowering those? There's a lot of community support. And then I guess question number two is, do you think state staff are likely to support any potential legislative efforts to amend 29A 2117 to add red light ticketing to the carve out for traffic camera enforcement, especially given the current pilot and work zones? That was a mouthful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I have to go.
Big questions.
So the first one is yes. And in fact, we've been talking with Portland staff that this is sort of what we've been saying to the Portland staff on lots of roads is we want to understand what mobility looks like, but if we lower the speed limit and people are still moving, even if it's slower, but they're moving, I think that's okay, right? As long as people can reliably get from point A to point B and they're not sitting through 5 to 6 lengths of lights, I think some amount of slowdown is okay. We just don't want to paralyze that area. So we have been open to that. We've been open to the context conversation, but we want to base it on real traffic engineering. Or, we've offered to go out and put, if you need to pave instead of doing the heavy paving job, maybe this year you put the light pavement down, go paint some lines, see if people scream, they hate it or they love it, try it. We're really supportive of the let's pilot it approach. So yes, the camera light thing is really complicated, but the speed zone light has not passed yet. There's a lot of talk about it. Arkansas is doing it, by the way. Other states, there's 25 states that have adopted work zone. I think it's going to take getting that done first to be able to go any further politically. So we'll see where we go. The Turnpike is giving it an all-out try. I think most people in this room know we had a tragedy last week, and I would say that speed is a killer, and we all have to do something different. So,
All right. Thank you, Joyce, so much for being here. Actually, Lou, okay, Lou, go. And then.
I just actually a question about potentially collaborating with school departments. Make a strong case that a 5-year-old can't drive a car to school. And it should be safe enough for them to get there without having to get in a car. And in Gorham, we're fortunate, it's K through 12 within a mile of each other. And we've had some success, town staff helping get sidewalks replaced at a much cheaper cost. I think there's kind of a disconnect. The school department is obviously not transportation experts. They know how to get the buses around to a certain degree, but how can we possibly collaborate more with the the state level school department, not just on the transportation, but I think that the housing should be close to
Yeah.
the schools, right?
Yeah.
And they have significantly large amounts of space, and you could build a community around it.
Right. I mean, Department of Education has been brought into the conversation through the climate lens, and, talk to them about the school siting, which is local control, right? That's what they're going to tell you. But one of the things we've been telling them is, okay, but you need to tell this school when they tell us, oh, it's going to be 100% bust, and then they want us to build a 2-mile sidewalk. That's not so good. And so we are pushing back on applications with school districts saying, please don't tell us it's 100% bust, because you're going to have kids that will never get on that school bus for whatever reason, and they're going to ride their bike or try to walk, and we need to keep them safe too. And so I think that they are being brought into the conversation somewhat. One thing I would say that we at the Department of Transportation do road audits. And so one thing that we are willing to do is go out with a team of people and meet with your team and say, hey, you could do this, that, and the other thing. We are allowing some things, like I said, speed tables on arterials that we've not allowed in the past. So there's some new suite of things that are open that might be helpful. What we do ask is it not be somebody from the neighborhood who calls us and asks us to go out. We want it to be a municipal official that asked us to come out, because we need to make sure, if we agree to these things, the municipality is going to agree to take care of it.
All right. Joyce, thank you so much
That was quick.
for being here. I know it went really fast. Can we have a round of applause for Joyce?
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have a break now, and for about 10 minutes, going to ask you to come back at 3:05, so 8 minutes. And I asked you in my introductory remarks to introduce yourself to somebody you don't know. So please try to do that, find a little common ground, understand a different perspective. We'll see you back at 3:05.